Part 56. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 559. At the entrance of the nuclear power plant, the atmosphere began to become more and more depressing. The audience was a kind of creature with the pursuit of advantages and avoidance of disadvantages integrated into their bones, but they were not sheep in the sheepfold. It was not impossible to pen them together obediently like sheep. But it seems that only broadcasters can do this. The rest, no matter how strong they are, really can't do it. Even if they can suppress it with a moment of momentum, it is only temporary. Because you're not a radio broadcaster, you don't have the huge pressure to dissuade listeners. When this kind of suppression lasts for a long time, the initial effect of killing the chicken to scare the monkeys will naturally fade away. Moreover, it is impossible to kill the chicken to scare the monkeys again. Everyone's hearts have become much more fragile than at the beginning. For such a long time, sitting here and communicating with each other, even if they don't speak, just eye contact has gradually become more fragile. The original mess became more cohesive than before. The listeners naturally understand this truth. Therefore, they are now equivalent to a trembling powder keg. They are afraid, and therefore they dare not come out to be the leader for the time being. But if someone else steps up to lead at this time, as they stormed the gate, the rest of the people would definitely not sit back and watch this person be directly killed by the 5 Chinese like the previous one. Munan was still sitting there leisurely, as if he hadn't noticed anything. It seemed vaguely like he was dozing off. George, on the other hand, looked at the sky, slowly stood up, and walked downstairs. Stephen and Mikari stood up and left with him. Munan also slowly opened his eyes at this time and looked at George's leaving back. A woman next to her immediately looked at Munan and prepared to stand up, but Munan stretched out her hand to indicate that she should do nothing, so the woman could only sit back down again. The departure of the 3 British men seemed to be an inflection point that changed the balance and atmosphere on the field. The people below were slowly getting ready to make moves, and this trend was getting more intense. Munan was still sitting there peacefully, just like an old monk in meditation. Soon, Subai and 4 others walked out of the nuclear power plant. Subai stood beside Munan. "I can't hold it anymore." What Subai was talking about was naturally a group of listeners below, and Emma was also below. When she saw Subai coming out, her eyes stayed on Subai for a moment, but it was obvious that Emma didn't know that she was actually with Subai. Bai and Bai still met each other in the last reincarnation, but now they meet as strangers. This story world is actually not very fair, because the mastery of information, regardless of the division of strength, has become the watershed between the level of initiative and the level of initiative. There are many people in the audience below who have good abilities, but they still seem ignorant. "If you come out 10 minutes later, the fight will begin," Munan said calmly. "Where are those Americans?" Subai discovered that George and the others were missing. "Let's go and do something." Munan clapped his hands and stood up. Many audience members below also stood up. When 4 more Chinese people appeared and these Chinese people all stood up and looked this way, the people below, all the listeners, felt a threat. "I'll go find them," Subai said. "Go find them. Who will come to the door?" Munan said to Subai. "You should have something." Subai didn't pay attention to Munan and continued to move forward. "Let's do this, you and I go, and the rest of us continue to watch the door. After all, there are many talents in the audience. Who can be sure that no one among them is capable or unlucky enough to enter the real world, the core area?" I said, "That's your problem. Even if something unexpected happens and I'm reincarnated again, I don't care." Subai said, stopped, and looked at Munan. "The level of information is starting to get higher and higher, and it is getting richer and richer. Both the American and I have the ability to retain memories until the next reincarnation, but you do not. Although you are wise, you can be sure that you will have enough time in your next reincarnation. Can you deduce all the current information? You are threatening me. Munan smiled slightly and looked at Subai seriously. I can also defeat him to the death. Haha, I didn't lose anything anyway, I just let a few of my friends die again. Subai shrugged. But you should know that some things can never happen again. It's not only my fault, but also the thing behind me. Do you think there will be another reincarnation? Munan said with a look on his face. I am doing this for your own good. Some people are already breaking the rules, and it seems that you are too. Rules? Who made the rules? Subai looked very confused. Is it the rules set by the broadcaster or the rules set by you, Munan? The three of us were sitting on the ground talking about something before, Munan reminded. I'm sorry, I don't know what the rules are. Subai shook his head. For the audience, rules are meaningless. It seems that we are preparing to break up. We never really got together. After saying that, Subai turned and left, with the fat monk and Gyatso following behind him. Munan's four subordinates all looked at Munan at this time. They knew that Munan did not look like he had been betrayed. The man named Subai should also know this. Let's go into the nuclear power plant. Munan smiled and seemed to be in a good mood. The Three Kingdoms killing is about to begin. The four subordinates around him all stood up and followed Munan into the nuclear power plant. Then, the audience outside also stood up. After watching for a while, they also began to walk towards the nuclear power plant one by one. Munan walked in the front, surrounded by four men. A gap opened in the palm of his left palm, and a scarlet tentacle began to sway out. I don't believe it. This time, luck is not on my side. The vast majority of the audience has already gathered at the nuclear power plant either by themselves or by others, so the probability of encountering another audience at the periphery is not high now. No one really has the big heart to treat a story world with such a large background as a place for outings. Therefore, no matter whether they are willing or unwilling, no matter how cautious they should have gathered at the nuclear power plant at this time. George stopped. At this time, he was in a relatively open area. Stephen, oh no, Liziame, you can start. After speaking, George winked at Mikari. Mikari understood, walked to the dead branches on one side, pushed away the upper layer of dead branches, and then took out pieces of toys, children's clothes, comic books, and even every photo of a child. They all were taken out and piled in the open area. The hair on Stephen's back slowly spread out, revealing the resentful face of an old woman. The old woman looked at the toys and clothes on the ground, with blood and tears in her eyes. She knelt on the ground, raised her arms, and murmured and shouted something. George stood aside, and Mikari stood behind George. I don't know why, but Mikari seemed to be George's shadow at this time. He didn't speak or make any movements, and just stood quietly in George's shadow. As if, it's as sweet as sugar. The ceremony lasted for 5 hours. George looked in the direction of the nuclear power plant more than once. Faintly, a group of dark clouds that were different from the surroundings were floating towards here from the nuclear power plant, although it was very fast. Slowly, although it seems very hesitant, it is still slowly drifting here. That very smart Chinese man should still be circling the nuclear power plant at this time. A meaningful smile appeared on the corner of George's mouth. Don't think that I don't know what you are paying attention to. You want to go in and pick fruits while I am pulling that thing out of the nuclear power plant. But when that thing leaves the nuclear power plant, the whole rules of the game will change. You can get in, but you can't get out. Being able to calculate a smart person, George felt very accomplished. In the world of the story, only such confrontations and calculations can bring pleasure and make people feel interesting. I feel someone is approaching here at this time, the old woman looked at George and said. It doesn't matter, you continue to do your thing. George turned around and looked into the woods ahead. He could vaguely see 4 figures heading here. I thought you would stand on Munan's side and cooperate with Munan, but I didn't expect that you would come to me. George's voice penetrated the shackles of distance and appeared in the forest. When Subai and the others were less than 20 meters away from him, George stretched out his hand to signal that Subai and the others could stop. I'm not here to cooperate with you. Subai looked at George and said. I know. George nodded, but I'm sorry, you guys are probably late. For some things, whoever takes the first step is destined to continue to lead. One thing is strange to me. More than 5 hours have passed. Since you four Chinese people did not choose to enter the nuclear power plant, it is impossible to be trapped there and unable to get out. Then you went out to have a barbecue. So, is that why you found my location now? Let's go back to the county first, Subai said. Oh, it's a pity, and it's stupid, you are still slow, George said calmly. We are not going to the county town to get things, Subai sighed, and then asked, but there are 3 people in your team, one is seriously injured by radiation, 4v2, why do you think the victory is still on my side? Oh, really, what if I am a senior audience? George asked. Haha, do you think we are slandering you? Even if you gained an enhancement in the last reincarnation, you are still some way away from being promoted to a high-level listener, Fatty mocked. Mikari came out behind George. George stretched out his hand. Patted Mikari on the shoulder. Yes, I just absorbed a portion of the enhancement, but my clone, Mikari, also absorbed a portion. Mikari began to melt and gradually integrated into George's body. George's aura began to surge at this time. Rise. 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 Until. A breath that belongs to advanced listeners. Starting to show up. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 560. The rules have changed. The woman next to Munan said that she had just followed the method taught by Munan in advance, but failed to transfer. However, there were other people who disappeared. They disappeared very strangely, as if hands suddenly stretched out from the void and dragged them in. Munan originally had 4 subordinates here, but at this time, this female warrior was the only one who was still with Munan. As for the rest of the audience, there were also experts who saw that this was a formation-like existence, and began to, after trying to crack it, some of them suddenly disappeared out of thin air. This kind of disappearance. It was definitely not successful in entering that place and then discovering the cylindrical building and the batch of firefighting suits at the door. At this point, Munan could tell. The rules have changed and it's become harder. Munan stood there, looking at the dark clouds that were getting farther and farther in the sky. Will something happen to them? The woman asked Munan. She was worried about the other 3 people. It doesn't matter if something happens, Munan smiled, there will be another reincarnation. Even if you die, you will be resurrected in the next reincarnation. The woman looked at Munan and said seriously, we believe in you. I know, so I won't abandon you. Munan reached out and gently touched the woman's delicate neck, you all know this. Are you sure? The woman still felt a little apprehensive. This is a feast of sharing, and I will share it with you. Munan glanced at the audience who were like headless flies in the distance, and they will all be our food and our stepping stones. Our sacrifice. Wait a minute, this dark cloud is floating too slowly. Wait until it floats farther, and wait until he is entangled by those Americans, then it will be time for me to really take action. It's just a changing rule of the game. How many Americans really think this can trap me? Don't worry, Mu Yao, I will become the core of this story world, and you will all be resurrected in the next reincarnation. The dead listeners here, their enhancements, will be up to you to choose. This is the reward I give you for following me in this story world. I will be able to control the explosion of the nuclear. When we are full and finished eating, I will end the nuclear. The main mission will be completed, and we can return to the real world. As Munan spoke, he gently raised his hand. The next moment, a twisted ripple appeared on his palm. At the same time, his palm disappeared. But soon, his hand was retracted back. The ripples disappeared and the palm was taken out again. You see, it's not this rule that traps me. When I want to go in, it actually just depends on my personal wishes. Mu Yao nodded and stopped talking. When the aura of a high-level audience emerged from George, the faces of Subai and the other 4 people did show surprise. Everyone has their own trump card, but even Subai didn't expect that since George's trump card is this one, it means that from the second reincarnation, when Munan followed him into the underground of the cylindrical building, George he was already using his own clones to absorb the reinforcements from others. Such highly simulated clones were something Subai had never seen before. Even if I have heard that high-level listeners have clones, such as Liang Sen, Xie Zhen said that Liang Sen sealed one of his clones in his villa in Shanghai to suppress his own strength. But in Subai's previous impression, the clone was almost like a puppet at most, but here, George's clone was indeed too anthropomorphic. Basically, it was equivalent to another living person. It's no wonder that Xie Zhen wants to find himself and Fatty to deal with Liang Sen's clone. A senior person who is not a senior audience can point out such a clone, but what about Liang Sen? As a high-level listener, or even someone whose level is not low as a high-level listener, how terrifying would his clone be? I have been acting for a long time. Subai looked at George, but he didn't feel too afraid, because although George showed the aura of a high-level audience, this aura was in a state of constant fluctuation, making it appear that very vain. After all, the so-called pseudo-advanced listeners are created by forcibly smashing clones and strengthening them. Although they are powerful in themselves, there is still a long way to go compared to the real high-level listeners. Quantitative changes can certainly it will cause qualitative change, but the quality level of this qualitative change must first be marked with a question mark. In addition, there are 4 people on Subai's side. Facing this pseudo-high-level audience, even if they are defeated, it is estimated that it will be difficult for the other party to kill all 4 of them. They still have the ability to protect themselves. What's more, the reason why George fused in advance and forcibly revealed the aura of a high-level audience was that the intimidation effect was actually higher than the actual effect. His more purpose was to stop the 4 of him and win more time for the old woman behind him. This is not an act. George shook his head. It's just that you have forgotten the terrifying wisdom of the Chinese named Munan during the first reincarnation, and you, Su, your madness and hysteria really scared me. Arrive. God bless me, I have one more reincarnation memory than you, so this is my advantage, prepared from the beginning. I have 2 clones, which are my foundation, my everything, and me. The reason why I can gain a foothold in the senior level is that in each reincarnation, in that cylindrical underground building, there is only enough time to absorb the reinforcement of 1 listener. This fits my clone perfectly. I can absorb 3 reinforcements at the same time. Strengthening. In fact, I originally thought that I had the confidence to defeat you 2 Chinese people head-on, but because you left some psychological shadow on me in the last reincarnation, I decided to direct and act with my doppelganger. Make a play. Haha, you should be proud of me for forcing me to come this far. TCH, a fake high-level listener who pretends to be better than a real high-level listener. The fat man smiled and patted his fat face. Damn you, Yankee, you are so thick-skinned. Faced with the fat man's ridicule, George was not angry. He had this attitude before, and he still has this attitude now. But because he was forcibly promoted to a senior audience, he deliberately showed more magnanimity than before. It seemed that Subai and others, who were still senior listeners at this time, were no longer qualified to make him angry or care too much. I admit that I am not a real advanced listener yet, but after I absorb all of you, even if it is forcibly piled up, I will be able to stack myself up to at least the middle level of an advanced listener. And you? You're strengthening. They will all become stepping stones for me to move forward. It's your pleasure. Damn it, you are still pretending, Keep pretending, Fatty tells you, don't pretend to be cool, or you will be struck by lightning if you pretend to be cool. The dark black cloud in the sky finally came to the top of everyone's heads, and a little boy slowly walked down from the sky. The old woman was still kneeling in front of the little boy's clothes and toys, crying loudly, stained with blood and tears, expressing her longing for him. This scene was very tear-jerking. Looking at the little boy walking down to his grandmother, George's mouth showed a happy arc of success in his plan. This old woman was resurrected in a clone of himself, which means he has the power to decide the life and death of this old woman's soul. Therefore, George is not afraid that this old woman will escape from his control, unless she wants to destroy herself. And after this old woman coaxed her grandson out of the nuclear power plant, she could control the little boy through the old woman, and thus control the entire nuclear world. At that time, he is equivalent to controlling reincarnation in disguise, and all the listeners in this story world will become his prey and tonic. The little boy walked down from the sky, a little doubtful, and slowly approached the old woman. Finally, under the old woman's shouts, he fell into the old woman's arms. This is a really touching scene of the reunion of grandparents and grandchildren. Only soon, George realized something was wrong. Because when he saw the 4 Chinese people in front of him, there was no look of surprise or disappointment on their faces. Instead, there was just a hint of schadenfreude. The fat man even took out a cigarette from his pocket and lit it happily. As if I'm just here to watch the fun and everything has nothing to do with me. Are these 4 Chinese people bluffing again? Hee hee. Now there is no point in trying any tricks. Munan over there, you haven't broken through the obstacles yet. Okay, I will restart the cycle and let you all return. George, you are very smart, Munan is also very smart, you are all smart, but we are not smart, Subai said. George raised his hand, and when he lowered his hand, he would order the old woman to let his grandson restart the next reincarnation. In the next reincarnation, he, George, would not only retain his memory, but also retain his current strength and status. Oh, you mean, you are stupid? George asked in surprise. Yes, we are stupid people, so stupid people have to use stupid methods. You and Munan are both smart people. Smart people naturally use smart people's methods. It's similar to the dragon's tail but not its head, similar to winning a battle thousands of miles away. You can use your scheming and your wisdom to calculate, plan, and lay out. We fools can only walk around on our own 2 legs. Speaking of this, Subai looked at the warm scene of grandparents and grandchildren meeting each other over there. After coming out of the nuclear power plant, the 4 of us returned to the county town, but instead of picking up the children's toys and clothes, we returned the same way and got on the road outside the county town. There is a guard post on the other side of the road, and Korean soldiers are stationed there to prevent outsiders from entering here by mistake. Why are you telling me this? George asked a little confused. According to the unspoken rules of broadcasting, it is impossible for us to leave this area. The maximum range of our activities is only to the Korean guard post. Don't tell me, you 4 senior listeners, at this moment, the idea in your mind is to escape from here, haha. We are stupid, but we are not retarded. Subai smiled and continued. There is an internet connection at the security post. Do you know this? George. Reports and reasons for the nuclear power plant leak can be found online. Do you know this? Do you think it's ironic? Do you think it's outrageous? The secret of this story world, you only need to run to the outermost Korean guard post, knock out a few Korean soldiers, and then use the computer inside to search online and find out. What a simple method, but we are also here. The last thing that comes to mind is, are we, including you, including Munan, all stupid? After saying these words, Subai ignored George's surprised look, pointed at the old woman and said, George, do you know her true identity? Before George had time to understand the profound meaning of Sudbai's words, he saw the old woman who was holding her grandson and crying bitterly open her mouth. The next moment, her lips split in a terrifying arc, and she bit off her precious grandson's head. Wrapped in the mouth. Then while shedding tears of blood. While chewing like crazy. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 561. George was stunned. He didn't know why everything turned out like this. It was completely different from what he had imagined and what he had deduced. Subconsciously, George went to control his second clone, which was Stephen. However, the old woman just glanced at George, and then continued to devour her grandson. The little boy's upper body had been almost eaten away, and it seemed that devouring the little boy caused the old woman to mutate, which directly caused George's second clone, Stephen, to basically lose contact with his original body. Moreover, George's whole face also showed a look of pain. As the second clone separated from himself, he, as the original self, also began to suffer a kind of backlash. This is a kind of backlash that comes from the body, but also from the depths of the soul. No, no, no. George's eyes were about to burst with anger, and the breath on his body began to tremble and float continuously. Damn, don't go crazy, this guy, the fat man said, a little scared. If he self-destructs again, we are so close to him, so we will follow him. But there is an inseparable connection between the clone and the main body. In this way, the strength of the clone can be fed back to the main body to the greatest extent. At the same time, it can also stimulate the improvement of the clone's strength to the maximum extent, and also suppress the possibility of the clone losing control. However, in this way, once something goes wrong with the clone, the main body will not be spared either. The clones made by ordinary people are actually used as disposable items in most cases, used to cut off the back and enter dangerous areas, but George obviously uses the clone as a springboard to improve his strength. He had previously used a clone to deliberately possess the old woman Li Xiaomei, in an attempt to use Li Xiaomei to summon the spirit, summon the little boy from the base camp of the nuclear power plant, and use the family ties between grandparents and grandchildren to control the little boy and achieve the purpose of controlling reincarnation. But now, it is obvious that he has lost his wife and lost his troops. Reminiscent of George's previous vows and majesty, even a monk can't help but feel a sense of schadenfreude at this time. It's no wonder that in this story world, because of the asymmetry of information, it is even an extremely obvious task among the audience. The difference in participation made the monk feel very uncomfortable. It seems that in this story world, I am playing a role for Sudbai. Grandmother Li Xiaomei swallowed her grandson whole, her belly swelled, as if she was pregnant, she grinned, laughed, and then walked into the air, step by step, very hurriedly, as if she was in a hurry, very impatient. And here, black lines began to appear on George's face. These black lines suddenly made his face look particularly ferocious. Before, George looked a bit like a foreign university professor, but now, he looks like a foreign university professor. He is a gambler who loses everything he has worked so hard for. At the same time, he was like a drug addict, showing a feeling of hysteria. You're not satisfied with swallowing my clone, but you actually want to swallow me as well. George opened his mouth and let out a beast-like growl from his throat. He immediately jumped into the air, jumped up, and reached out to grab Li Xiaomei's ankle. Li Xiaomei's eyes showed resentment, but she, who had planned to take action against George, suddenly turned her head and looked in the direction of the nuclear power plant, with a look of surprise and even some panic on her face. Immediately, black clouds enveloped the two of them together, and then roared away in the direction of the nuclear power plant. Damn, it's so high-tech. We're still walking on the ground with our legs, but everything here is so crazy, the fat man teased with his hands on his hips. The ability of advanced listeners to stay in the air for a short period of time is much stronger than that of senior listeners, because they are more able to integrate and control the surrounding space environment, Gyatso explained. By the way, did you see Li Xiaomei's last look? She seemed afraid. She should indeed be afraid, Subai smiled. How could that guy Munan stay at the nuclear power plant so calmly? If he didn't bother with something, he would be sorry for his IQ. Now here's the thing, Gyatso smiled. However, originally I thought this was a Three Kingdoms killing, with the Americans on one side, Munan on the other, and us on the other side, but now it seems that we just ran an errand to go to the security post. I took my computer and googled it, and it seemed that I didn't have to do anything. Foolish people are blessed by fools, the monk couldn't help laughing. In this story world, the broadcast seems to be a bit targeted. After it's over, you can go check and find out what Munan and George are tinkering with in their respective circles. Monk, do you think this is a punishment for broadcasting? Subai asked. Amitba, I can only say that it is somewhat similar. Otherwise, there is no way to explain the poor monk and others. No, to be precise, most people are actually making soy sauce. Broadcasting has always pursued storytelling. In the world of stories, it will try its best to mobilize every listener, but in this story world, because of reincarnation and nuclear reasons, most of the listeners don't even know that their environment is reincarnated again and again. This is contrary to broadcasting. The principle of storytelling first. What the heck, it's worth burning incense to be alive instead of dying here for no reason and to be nourishment for others. In the case of the Three Kingdoms killing, the two rebels, Munan and George, have already rebelled. Li Xiuying the traitor also jumped, which is good. As a master and a loyal person, we don't have to watch the traitor and the traitor die together, so we can be happy and relaxed. The fat man shrugged and yawned. So, we can just take a shower and go to sleep. Inside the nuclear power plant, Munan quietly looked at the dark clouds in the distance. Finally, his brows slowly relaxed. That American succeeded. Then, it will be my turn next. Munan opened his hands, and a twisted crack appeared in front of him, and then he walked in. Mu Yao stood there without moving. She knew that Munan would not be polite if she needed help. But at the moment, he felt that he was fully capable of handling everything by himself. Looking at the dark night and the blood moon that were not in his memory but had a very familiar feeling, Munan took a deep breath, as if he could smell the core with this breath. A charming smell, a smell that made him intoxicated. Is this a firefighting suit? Munan looked at the row of firefighting uniforms in front of him. Everything I wear should remember me. Munan closed his eyes silently, and the next moment, a tentacle slowly grew out of a firefighting suit, as if waving to Munan. Munan walked over, reached out, picked up the firefighting uniform, put it on, and walked straight into the cylindrical building in front of him. The feeling of radiation makes people feel a little disoriented, and the body begins to shake involuntarily, but it seems to have been experienced in the last reincarnation, so this time, it is acceptable. When he walked into the underground rotunda, the black ball in the center fell completely in front of Munan's eyes. What a nice view! Munan admired sincerely. He couldn't help but walked over and stood in front of the black ball. The black ball is stationary, it does not constantly expand and contract, and it still looks very different from the heart. Of course, this is because the little boy who originally lived in the black ball has now gone out. This is the most beautiful throne in the world. But me will be your master. Munan stretched out his hand and stroked the black ball. The hot temperature kept burning his palm, making the palm of his hand smell like it was being burned. But he didn't mind at all. Tentacles were released one after another on his body. Go out like a giant octopus. Many tentacles covered the black ball from all directions, using the mucus on the tentacles to constantly moisten the temperature of the black ball. Finally, the tentacles began to try to penetrate the black ball. At the same time, "Start controlling the black ball. You are mine," Munan growled. "In this story world, I am the final winner." Munan's tentacles lifted the black ball, and at the same time, his whole body was moved by the tentacles and landed on the black ball. At this moment, the black ball was at his feet, and he had vaguely the ability to control this environment. "It only takes 10 more minutes. After 10 minutes, I will completely control you, erase all traces of you, and become my forbidden concubine." Munan licked his lips, and in his mind, all the listeners in this story world appeared one by one. They will all become meals for themselves and their subordinates. Even, Munan is confident that after this story world, he will lead several of his subordinates to attack the rank of senior listeners. This means that after being promoted to senior listeners, his Munan and his family will also be among the senior listeners. It occupies a great influence on the level. Ah! Outside, there was a piercing scream. "Well, are you back?" Munan reached out and pinched it gently, and a bead shattered in his palm. Mu Yao, who was staying outside, suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest, and her heart exploded directly at this moment. The blood turned into a barrier, covering the top of the nuclear power plant. "Mu Yao, don't worry, you will be resurrected in the next reincarnation." "Haha, it is easy for a mentally retarded little guy to leave his cradle, but it is impossible to come back." Before Munan's soliloquy ended, the blood-colored barrier outside collapsed in an instant. "What? How is that possible?" "That blood-colored barrier has a miraculous effect on defending ghosts. It can successfully make ghosts fall into confusion and previous painful experiences. How could that little guy break it open so quickly?" Next moment, a black cloud appeared below the rotunda. From the dark clouds, a hateful-looking old woman and George, who looked pained and filled with hatred, walked out. "What about the little boy?" Munan suddenly felt a very ridiculous feeling. "Because this is consistent with what I have designed and deduced. Totally different." The old woman opened her mouth and looked at the black ball that was about to be completely controlled by many tentacles. The little boy's painful expression appeared on her face. At the same time, she opened her mouth. Explosion, Korean. Then. Exploded. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 562. In the distance, a mushroom cloud appeared over the nuclear power plant, like a poppy planted by the devil in the human world. In an instant, what was condensed was a bloody and extremely depressing scene. No matter how skilled a painter is, it will be difficult for him to paint a picture of this tone. This is a kind of contempt for life and ruthlessness towards nature. A mere painting or a mere photograph cannot reflect even the slightest chance. Humanity's nuclear research has been proceeding intensively. Generation after generation of great scientists have contributed their wisdom and years to this cause. At the end of World War II, when the Americans dropped atomic bombs on Japan, nuclear suddenly became extremely clear in human cognition. It began to transform from abstraction to image, such as the Chernobyl incident and the Fukushima nuclear power plant incident. More importantly, it shows the insignificance and powerlessness of human beings in the face of nuclear weapons. Perhaps, nuclear itself has no right or wrong. What determines whether nuclear is right or wrong is actually the manifestation of human beings' own cleverness and selfishness. It would be nice if there was popcorn at this time. The four people, Fatty, Monk, Sudbai and Gyatso, were sitting on the eaves of Lindsay Highway stop, watching the mushroom cloud rising and slowly dissipating in the nuclear power plant ahead. Four people with 8 legs, like a team of friends going out for a picnic, facing the other side of the mountain, watching the sunset, chatting, dazed, passing the boring and leisurely time. This time, the power of the nuclear explosion should not be small, but the scope of the impact has been weakened a lot. It may even cause real damage in the cylindrical area, and it will not be like the previous reincarnation. The audience was wiped out in one fell swoop. On Subai's side, he felt a gust of wind blowing over, messing up everyone's hair and clothes, but there was no other obvious damage. Of course, it is certain that the concentration of nuclear radiation in the surrounding environment has once again reached the peak, but it will not kill the audience immediately. It's not very powerful. The fat man scratched his head and found that his hair began to slowly fall off, and his body began to decline due to excessive nuclear radiation. The whole of South Korea is not a big area. Although it is not that big in terms of the power of the explosion, the impact of nuclear radiation is enough to turn more than 1/5 of South Korea into a nuclear pollution zone. This is very important, for it is a fundamental destruction of the political, economic, and social systems of South Korea, Gyatso said. Haha, maybe now the fat man in the north has opened his arms to welcome the people of South Korea back into his embrace. The fat man joked, it would be interesting if the peninsula was unified as a result. I think what touches me the most is what kind of spirit this old woman has that allows her to lurk in an enemy country for decades, and even her son doesn't know her identity. Then when her son grew up, he went to elementary school, middle school, high school, college, and finally became a nuclear scientist and started a family. She worked hard to support her son's progress and growth just like a normal single mother. He also cared about his daughter-in-law and at the same time brought up his grandson slowly. But just because of the call from there, she was able to reveal her identity to her son, use her daughter-in-law's life, use her grandson's life to coerce her son to do tricks in the nuclear power plant, causing the nuclear power plant to leak, and let this person. People from the entire county were buried together. I really can't understand that even we Buddhists can't brainwash a person to this extent. Gyatso said. I don't know either, Subai sighed, feeling a little sad. The whole incident has been dug up by South Korea. This old woman did not hesitate to kill her daughter-in-law and grandson, take their lives, and coerce her son, causing the first serious nuclear leak. Human nature. It can be twisted to such an extent that even the audience who is used to seeing bloody events can't help but smack their lips. But no matter what, this story world, for us, is like coming in to make soy sauce. The monk is still struggling with this matter. Judging from the process and results, it was a game between Munan and George, two terrifyingly deep-minded Chinese and Americans. The outcome of the game was that both sides perished together in the end due to a strange combination of circumstances. Even as an opponent, I feel a little regretful about the ending of these two people. If these two smart people can continue to live, it will be such a terrible thing, and at the same time, what a terrible thing it will be. Something worth looking forward to. Let's go back and investigate. I think these two people must have touched the reverse side of the broadcast. This story world is actually more like a situation specially arranged by the broadcast for these two smart people. Maybe, in the end, when the old woman forced George to go to the nuclear power plant to die with Munan, the broadcaster was sitting on the chair looking at the screen in front of him and laughing, feeling smug about the final success of his plan. Gyatso looked up at the sky and said with some sadness, and we, in this story world, are just the characters who accompany the prince to study. We did not seize the opportunity. Of course, we will not become those who were killed. Unlucky guy. Thank you, bye Max. It's too perfunctory to say thank you. When you should abandon me, you will abandon me anyway. Subai broke down the situation unceremoniously. Don't be so direct. How can you continue to be hypocritical in the future? Gyatso was also dumbfounded. In my temple, there are suppressed ancient zombie coffins. If you need them, I can give them to you. Just treat it as your reality. The world once and the story world once saved me in return. Master Buddha, you didn't intend to give it to me before you co-wrote it. That's a cultural relic, Gyatso said. I didn't hand it over to the country but planned to give it to you. I've already made a big concession. Sure, I won't be disrespectful, Subai agreed. By the way, I'm really curious. In the first reincarnation, why did you end up fighting with Munan and actually kill him? Gyatso asked. Subai shook his head. You ask me, who should I ask? Amitba, I'm afraid it's impossible to find the answer, because the two parties involved in this matter are no longer alive, and the radio will not give you the answer, the monk said. This world is beginning to collapse, Fatty pointed around and said. Indeed, ripples began to ripple out and turned into fragments falling down. In the end, after the whole world collapsed, the four of them discovered that the environment around them had completely changed. Ahead. It was a nuclear power plant that looked like ruins, and he was wearing a firefighting suit. There were nearly 30 listeners in one row, and about 7 or 8 of them fell to the ground, lifeless. They were completely dead listeners. The rest of the people seemed to be in a dream. Is this the nuclear world and the principle of reincarnation? It is indeed not a real world or a story world, the monk pondered. Next moment. Rays of white light enveloped everyone one after another. This mission world. Declare the end. Handsome pot, handsome pot. Subai woke up suddenly. He saw the steaming bowl of noodles and the basket of steamed buns placed on the table in front of him. At this time, he was holding a 50 yuan bill in his hand. Subai remembered that he took this out of his wallet before being pulled into the world of the story. He thought he would leave it to the boss and pay for it. After all, they were running a small business, and the noodles tasted really good. However, this time when entering the story world, in the real world, the time between before and after should be very short, so short that it is almost negligible. Shueguo, this is the kimchi pickled at home. Try it. I just heard your accent. You are from Sichuan, right? How can Sichuan people eat kimchi? The boss, who was not very tall, handed over a small plate with pickled radish and cabbage on it. When I was young, I grew up in Chengdu. Subai smiled. This is breakfast money. The boss took the money and gave the change. Kimchi, you don't need to pay for it. I gave it to you. Among our restaurants in Sichuan, if any restaurant in Sichuan wants to charge for kimchi, then it's a no-brainer. Yes, Subai responded, took the money from the boss and put it into his wallet. Yes, the boss smiled at Subai and went out to continue his business. Subai took a deep breath, and suddenly seamlessly transitioned from the story world back to the real world. This huge sense of gap did take some time to digest. Picking up the chopsticks, he put a small steamed bun into his mouth, chewed it, and swallowed it with difficulty. He took another mouthful of noodles, which was also a bit difficult to swallow. Thinking of the previous scene of rotten meat all over his body, Subai's appetite is not very good. I picked up some kimchi and put it in my mouth. It was refreshing and delicious, not greasy at all, and I could eat it happily. Subai sat here, and after finishing this small plate of kimchi, he stood up and prepared to leave. At this time, the two young people at the next table also finished eating and were about to leave. The young man holding the newspaper in his hand suddenly joked, "You said that in A Dream of Red Mansions, a stone can become a spirit, and journey to the west if there is something in it, you can become a demon. Will this core also become a spirit one day?" Another young man was dumbfounded and said, "Then go home quickly and see if your TV, your appliances, your refrigerator, and your laptop are ready, ha ha ha." The two young men walked out of the breakfast shop talking and laughing. They didn't find it? Subai stood behind them. He said softly hee hee twice. After breaking out for 2 days in a row, Long was a little tired. In the next few days, he would update twice a day. After he had rested, he would break out a few more times. After all, writing this type of article was indeed very labor-intensive, and Long was under a lot of pressure. I recommend a new book called Horror Stamps. It is a work written by a friend of Long's who imitated the radio model. Long has read the beginning of it and found it to be really good. It is also dark and supernatural. The protagonist is a cannibal. Everyone you can go and taste it, and help him order some for his collection. The title of the book is Stamps of Terror. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 563. After leaving the breakfast shop and getting into his pusa, Subai started the car, but it didn't start. Broadcasting uses extremely rich methods to constantly torture the listeners' bodies, souls, and many values and worldviews. Especially the seamless connection between the story world and the real world makes people feel like they are traveling on the set. Rao is Subai. It is difficult for him to change his identity all at once. Putting his hands on the steering wheel, Subai sat there for almost a quarter of an hour. When the rising sun shone into the car, bringing a warm feeling, Subai felt like waking up from a dream. After stretching, there was a crisp sound in the joints of his body. After leaving the story world, the broadcast would naturally completely repair his body. Subai felt that he had more control over every ounce of power in his body. At least, this wave of story world is not a loss for him, Subai. Various enhancements are further integrated. At the same time, the body's control of power is also more microscopic, and the direct improvement in combat power is also obvious. When facing the angel Shar before, Subai had to rely on the help of the fat man, but now Subai was confident that he could defeat the Birdman by himself. Immediately afterwards, Subai thought of George, the American who was forcibly promoted to the advanced audience level by fusing clones. Subai didn't know whether this method of forcing qualitative change purely through quantitative changes was correct, and he didn't bother to care. If there is such a thing as an unstable foundation, if he has the ability to be directly promoted to a senior audience, Subai wouldn't mind giving it a try. Because Subai is not a very patient person, nor is he like a monk who can keep his temper and walk step by step, but sometimes things often go against his wishes. It seems that he is still following the path of building a high city, accumulating food, and slowly becoming king, even if he really wants to take a shortcut. Subai started the car and drove towards Lao Fang's house. In fact, the breakfast shop was on the corner of the small road in front of Lao Fang's house, very close. Parking the car in the open space at the door, Subai pushed open the iron door and walked in. The monk was taking scissors and a kettle, taking care of the potted plants in the small courtyard. When he saw Subai coming back, he raised his head, looked up, smiled, and said hello. In the past, monks would also be responsible for doing these things, but now, it seems to have more flavor. It seems that after 3 months of slumber, coupled with the background of the world in the previous story where everything withered due to nuclear pollution, the monk has a more understanding of the green and vitality in front of him, especially the compassion shown on his body when pruning branches. His posture does not seem to be fake, it is very pure, which means that the monk's state of mind has gone a step further. Professions such as monks and Taoist priests often appear to the audience to emphasize skills rather than dharma. They pursue the mastery of power and means but ignore the cultivation of their own cultivation. Even monks, who are themselves eminent monks, have such a behavior. It's a problem of unbalanced feet, but looking at the monk's posture now, it shouldn't be a problem to achieve another breakthrough, but according to the monk's temperament, he shouldn't be in a hurry to break through to a high-level audience. After saying hello to the monk, Subai entered the back room. Gyatso was sitting cross-legged on the carpet. The majestic Buddha was playing building blocks with a cute child covered in milk. Back Gyatso said to Subai, "Daddy." The little guy immediately crawled towards Subai. Because the little guy's crawling involved the carpet, the building blocks that had just been built suddenly collapsed, making Gyatso sitting next to him smile bitterly. Picking up his son, Subai felt a sincere sense of satisfaction and sat down on the sofa. "Where's the fat man?" "Make a call upstairs," Gyatso said. "It should be to investigate Munan's situation. As for George's situation, because he is a Western audience, the news channel will be narrow for us, but the fat man is already here. The news has been posted on the forum, so there should be some news. Yes, Subai nodded. Not only him, but Fatty, Gyatso and the monk all felt that the deaths of Munan and George were a bit fishy. Subai remembered that in his last punishment world, he was declared a sinner straight away and had to be punished, but in the last story world, everything seemed to be hidden, but in the end the two of them died together with the old woman in the nuclear explosion. The ending is indeed a bit reminiscent of broadcast layout. At this time, the fat man just walked down, his face a little gloomy. "Why, didn't you hear any news?" Subai asked. The fat man shook his head. "No, I heard some news." "Dabai, do you still remember Juner and Taiza?" Subai nodded, indicating that he remembered that if he had not killed these two people in Kinhuangdao, he would not have been punished. In that story world, Subai's survival was really a fluke. That organization is now said to be in chaos, and branches in various regions are busy working on their own independence, Fatty said. "What do you mean?" Gyatso frowned. "Munan is the real leader of this organization." Subai put the little guy on the sofa, brought him a tablet to watch cartoons, reached out to pick up a glass of water from the coffee table, and took a sip. "If Munan is the leader of this organization, then all this makes sense. Okay, this organization, which we jokingly call the Broadcasting Worship Club, is similar to a pyramid scheme and a religion, and its purpose is to oppose God under the banner of broadcasting. I used to wonder why broadcasting could continue to let this kind of organization go on. Now it seems that broadcasting is not actually letting this organization go. It's just that broadcasting felt that this organization was not worth taking action before. So, has Munan's continuous rise finally won the attention of the radio?" Gyatso couldn't help but have a wry smile on his face. "Why do you feel that the radio is just like the governments of Western countries? They ignore you at the beginning, and then wait for you to gain weight. Let's formulate a policy or something to cut the wool." "Haha, to be honest, if I were a radio broadcaster, I wouldn't be able to say that I would watch helplessly as Munan led a bunch of his subordinates to break through to the level of advanced listeners. I feel scared just thinking about it," said the fat man. "This can also explain why there is a group of obedient listeners around Munan. I always found it strange before, but I don't find it strange anymore. The top management of the organization has such cohesion and execution ability." Subai stood up, walked to the kitchen, and opened the refrigerator. "There are a lot of vegetables in the refrigerator. I asked the monk to cook a vegetarian meal for noon today. Anyway, I can't eat meaty food now. Down." "Agree." The fat man raised his hand. "Me too." Buddha also agreed. After the monk had tidied up the flowers and plants in the small courtyard and entered the house, he had to take off his cassock, put on an apron and go into the kitchen to cook in the face of everyone's requests. Soon, a table of simple but exquisite dishes was served. "Zai is ready." After everyone had enjoyed the meal, Subai went to the bathroom to take a shower, then changed his clothes, took the car keys and changed his shoes at the entrance, and shouted, "I have something to do. Let's go out for a while. Just go out when you go out. You even take a shower and change clothes. It looks like you're looking for a girl. I'm finally done with my ascetic life and want to go out to vent." The fat man was playing with the little guy on the sofa. He immediately picked up the little guy and said with a smile, "Be careful, your father brings you a stepmother." The little guy didn't know whether he understood it or not. He chuckled. Of course, it was very likely that he understood it. This child was indeed much smarter than ordinary children. "Don't touch me in front of my son." Subai pointed at the fat man and warned. After leaving the house and getting in the car, Subai started the car and drove towards the city, while picking up the mobile phone and dialing Sunar's number. "Hello, I'm busy right now. If you have anything to ask me about, you can leave a message below." Subai frowned, and an ominous premonition immediately appeared in his heart. I called this number several times in a row, but still didn't get through. Could it be that because I was delayed, Sunar had already entered the story world? Sudbai pursed his lips, and a feeling of anxiety immediately came over him. As a last resort, Sudbai dialed Gufan's number. "Hello. It's me." "Well, it's you." Gufan recognized Sudbai's voice. "Where is Sunar?" Sudbai asked. "Why, are you worried about her now?" Gufan said calmly. The sound of a lighter came from the other end of the phone. It was obvious that Gufan was lighting a cigarette while answering the phone. "I asked her where she is now," Sudbai continued to ask patiently. "The story of her 3 experiencers has been completed, and the story of the first listener has also ended. Because the broadcast was suspended for 3 months, the second story came later. However, I have received the notification and will enter her 1 day later. Second audience story. I'm not like you, who just throws away a piece of rubbish magic weapon and is done with it. During the time I came back, I have been training her on some enhancements and skills. I even went out to practice with her in person, and I will lend it to her later. The magic weapon I use myself. Sudbai, I admit that you may be stronger than me now, but you are too ruthless and cold-blooded. You can forget our past friendships just as easily. You said that I am like a listener. In fact, you are the pure listener." Hearing that Gufan was personally instructing Sunar and planning to give his magic weapon to Sunar, Sudbai's emotions suddenly became uncontrollable and he shouted into the phone. "Damn it, do you know what you are doing? Let me tell you, if anything happens to Sunar and the difficulty is changed because of your bad words, even if you end up hiding in the West, I will go over and find you, extract your bones and skin. Make a statement. First, Long has not opened a new vest, and the only updated book now is Terror Broadcast. Secondly, the pen name Pure Little Dragon is a pen name that Long has continuously updated over the past few years. It is a pen name that embodies everyone's support and love. Long will not mess with it, but will only respect it and hope that it will one day I will be able to become a great pen name and have a reputation that will hold me high. Third, there are many fellow authors who are imitating the models of Horror Broadcast and Horror Net articles in opening books. Sometimes Long finds interesting writing and will push the chapters, but please don't misunderstand that it is Long Kai's little vest. I went out to write. First of all, the broadcast is still far away from the end. Secondly, according to the speed of Long's progress, Long's new works will only be more excellent and beautiful than the broadcast. People often ask Long on the public account which one is which and which one is yours. It seems like it's your little vest, Long replied uniformly. Here, it's not the case. Now the update of Terror Broadcast has occupied most of Long's energy and brain power every day. Sometimes he occasionally writes some extras to change his mind, and will publish them on the public WeChat account. You can add friends on WeChat and search for Kongbu66. If the display result shows that the user does not exist, there is a column below to search, click again, and it will appear. Don't panic, hold on tight to the dragon. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 564. Sudbai drove for half an hour and arrived at the gate of this villa complex in the suburbs. When he called Gufan again, he found that the phone had been turned off. He didn't know whether he had blocked himself intentionally or if it was really turned off. There was a security guard checking the identity at the door. People who were not residents were generally not allowed in. Sudbai pulled the car to the side and lit a cigarette. The 2 security guards in the security booth paid special attention to Sudbai, probably because of the car. After all, in this world, although people nobly advocate the pursuit of inner equality for everyone, when it comes to society, they look at cars and clothes. Looking at the watch ultimately depends on the identity, which is also a rule that everyone knows well. Subai's Pusat obviously shouldn't appear in such a high-end place. He stretched out his hand and shook out the cigarette ashes. Naturally, these security guards couldn't stop Subai, but Subai didn't know what he should do next. I deliberately distanced myself from Sunur, I deliberately ignored her. If I go back at this time and tell her, you will most likely die in the next story world, what's the use of it? Moreover, women are all emotional animals, but Subai is the most impatient to deal with things that have nothing to do with emotion. At this time, Subai saw a police car driving over. The car stopped next to Subai's car. The other person lowered the window and it was Chu Zhao. Chu Zhao looked at Subai with no expression on his face. He just waved, "You're here too, come in together." With Chu Zhao's car driving ahead, Subai would not be blocked if he followed behind. The car drove into an open space in a villa. Chu Zhao got out of the car and took off his police uniform. This guy obviously used the bus for personal use. Chu Zhao threw a cigarette to Subai, and Subai took it. Without saying anything, he motioned to go in. After several things happened between Subai and Chu Zhao, it was basically impossible to return to the previous state. The two sides only maintained a tacit understanding subconsciously. Of course, Subai saw a kind of fear for himself in Chu Zhao's eyes. Perhaps, after losing the so-called friendship, when Chu Zhao faced himself again, he finally realized the identity gap created by strength among the audience. The brothers who worked together in the fields once heard Chen Sheng shouting, "Don't forget each other even if we are rich and noble." Later, after Chen Sheng's uprising came true, the brothers who worked together in the fields came to see Chen Sheng, serving them delicious food and drinks, and even talked to others about it. Talking about what happened when Chen Sheng was a mudleg boy, in the end, Chen Sheng ordered someone to kill him. When some things, such as the so-called friendship, such as the so-called relationship, are hidden in front of you, some of the gaps between the two people will be blurred. But once the obstruction and illusion are eliminated, the differences brought about by status and strength the difference is clear. Subai didn't bother to care about what Chu Zhao was thinking. He was just thinking about how he would face Sunur later. Subai had a good impression of Sunur, but that kind of affection was only limited to the level of ordinary friends, and there was really no tendency to develop into a lover, especially after Subai expressed his feelings several times. The indifferent attitude here also brought the relationship between the two to an awkward position. This may be a common problem among men. Even Subai is not exempt from vulgarity. If he rejects a child he has a crush on, he will always feel that he owes something. Chu Zhao entered the villa. There was no furniture on the second floor of the villa. It was completely furnished like a practice room. At this time, Sunur was sitting cross-legged on a futon in the center, dripping with sweat, and sitting next to him a crossbow and a spear glowing with blue light. Subai once gave Sunur a magic weapon, but it is no longer visible. Gufan was leaning against the window, holding a cup of coffee in his hand. Seeing Subai come in, he didn't react at all. He continued to look at the scenery and drink coffee, as if Subai was no longer there. Sunur opened her eyes and saw Subai coming. A smile appeared on her lips. She stood up and said to Subai, "You're here." Subai walked to Sunur, stretched out his hand, and put it on Sunur's shoulder. He could clearly feel that there was a power flowing in Sunur's body. It was a very sacred and pure power. This power, Subai is familiar with it. After all, Subai has had many encounters with Western audiences. "What's going on? What's going on with the power in your body?" Subai asked. The power of the swordsman Gufan finally turned around at this time, looked at Subai and said, "I exchanged the medicine for Sunur, add some to it when bathing every day, and then use it with the swordsman I exchanged for her. The low-level skills, and because of my recent sparring, she now has the strength and fighting awareness of a low-level swordsman." As he spoke, Gu Fan smiled at Suner with a hint of reserve. Of course, the most important reason is because Suner has experienced in the military before and has a good foundation in fighting since he was a child, so the swordsman strengthened only then can it be mastered in such a short period of time. Chu Zhao stood aside. It seemed that because of some recent events, his understanding of Subai was deeper than before. At this time, Chu Zhao was keenly aware that he didn't know what was driving him, but Subai, he was clearly on the verge of going berserk. Thank you. Suner nodded to Gu Fan politely and thanked him. Don't be so polite, we are all friends. When he said this, Gu Fan deliberately glanced at Subai. Friend, your mother is better than you. Subai rushed forward and came directly to Gu Fan. Gu Fan was stunned. He didn't expect that Subai actually came to hit someone. When he exerted force with his palm, the coffee cup in his hand shattered, and he subconsciously retreated. But Subai's speed is too fast. After experiencing several nuclear radiation baptisms in the previous story world, Subai's control and integration of his own power have made greater progress than before. One hand directly grabbed Gu Fan's neck. Gu Fan used both hands to block. The two hands collided in the air, making a muffled sound. Then Gu Fan felt a pain in his chest, and his arms naturally spread out. Subai's hand went straight in, grabbed Gu Fan's neck, and pushed forward, push, push. Boom. Gu Fan's back crashed through the balcony behind him, and Subai rushed out of the second floor. Wow! Together they fell into the pool below. Buzz! Gu Fan spread his wings, and his aura suddenly increased. He was directly pressed and pushed here by Subai before, and Gu Fan also felt a surge of anger in his heart. However, the next moment, Gu Fan was once again backhanded by Subai, and was smashed firmly into the bottom of the swimming pool, directly creating a half pit at the bottom, and the water in the swimming pool began to drain out quickly. Fortunately, the villa is surrounded by dense forests to provide the owner with a private space, so there is no need to worry about what happens here being seen by outsiders. Gu Fan did not dare to fight with Subai again, because Subai was able to suppress him severely every time. Regardless of Subai or his strength, he had no chance of defeating Subai in one round. As for the magic or spells that some angels are good at, they have no chance to be used in close combat. Spreading his wings again, Gu Fan planned to take off first and forcefully distance himself from Subai. However, just as he was about to fly into the air, Subai turned into a blood mist and enveloped his head. A punch came out of the blood mist and hit Gu Fan's handsome left face directly. Boom! Gu Fan received the punch firmly this time, and his whole body was hit hard like a tennis ball. He slipped and fell from the edge of the pool, and all the tiles on the ground were broken. Hiss! Gu Fan let out a low roar in his throat, spread out his left hand, and a silver spear blessed by the holy light appeared in Gu Fan's hand. But even with the magic weapon in his hand, Gu Fan didn't have the slightest confidence to continue facing Subai. Hateful! Why has he made such obvious progress? If Subai didn't have the aura of a high-level listener, Gu Fan would have almost thought that Subai had been promoted to a high-level listener. With the holy spear in hand, Gu Fan just stood up again with the help of the holy spear. His momentum had fallen into absolute depression. In the previous consecutive fights, not only did he not take advantage, he was simply beaten like a sandbag. Subai was crushed underneath. Fortunately, Suner and Chu Zhao finally came over at this time. Chu Zhao ran to Gu Fan's side, and Suner came to Subai's side. Stop fighting, stop fighting. Suner's hands grasped Subai's wrist. Subai stopped his offensive and stood still. Gu Fan walked over step by step with Chu Zhao's support, and in the process, Gu Fan also took away his wings. What's wrong with you? Even at this time, Gu Fan still dared to get angry at Subai, because he knew that Subai dared to beat him, but he did not dare to kill him. Subai's cold eyes glanced at Gu Fan. Gu Fan was stunned. he suddenly felt that the person opposite him, who he had previously thought was just a ridiculous kid with some brain problems, could really kill him at this moment. If you continue to be ignorant. She doesn't know cause and effect, don't you, Subei? He asked. Do you know that you are killing her? Gufan was speechless for a moment. Subei, this is what I asked for. Gufan has told me the dangers of it, but I still decided to do it. If you don't become stronger, you will die. If you become stronger, you will die. I choose the latter, Suner said seriously. Said. Good. Subei shook off Suner's hand. You guys play. Looking at Subei's retreating back, Suner bit her red lips with her teeth, revealing traces of blood. Gufan squatted on the ground, rubbing the bruises on his body. Chu Zhao sighed and caught up with Subei. She doesn't want to be a burden to you, and she doesn't want to get too far away from you. Although I have nothing to do with you now, it's your fault if you treat Suner like this. Chu Zhao didn't flirt with Subei either. He walked shoulder to shoulder with Subei and said. She is just as stupid as you. Subei just said these words. Sure, I don't want to quarrel with you. I can't beat you, and I'm also afraid of you. Suner's next story world is called Mr. Zombie. The broadcaster has already informed you in advance. You will enter the story world tomorrow evening. I know you have a lot of experience. Gufan, and you, he can't compare to you now anyway. When your anger subsides, give her a call to pay attention to her before she enters the story world. Chu Zhao wanted to pat Subei on the shoulder, but after thinking about it, he forgot it and turned around and went back. He didn't see it. When Subei heard the words Mr. Zombie, the expression on his face suddenly froze. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 565. Subei sat back in his car and started the car. As Pusa trembled, Subei gently placed his hand on the tip of his nose. A long time ago, he had received a reward, that is, he could return to the car. In the story world I have experienced before, it lasted about 3 hours. The story world of Mr. Zombie touched Subei a lot and left a deep memory in Subei. The real and fake Lin Zhengying, the Zombie King, the painting on the Taoist mountain. Of course, the biggest memory is actually I brought the little guy back from that story world. Although until now, Subei still couldn't figure out why he could bring the little guy back to the real world from a story world. Subei's previous speculation was that maybe the little guy was no different from a spiritual beast in the broadcasting position. Allowing the world of the story to be brought out becomes a category similar to the audience's magic weapon. I just don't know. If I choose to use the previously useless reward to enter the Mr. Zombie story world after Suner enters the Mr. Zombie story world, will these two story worlds with the same name count? Is it one place, or two planes with the same name? This is where Subei hesitates the most. If the story world he enters is the Mr. Zombie story world where he and the monks have completed the mission, rather than a plot prologue that has been reorganized by the broadcast. In the story world of Mr. Zombie, Subei's efforts were completely useless. Not only was he unable to help Suner, he also wasted a precious special reward that he had been reluctant to use. In this case, Subei had a hard time making a choice, which was definitely inevitable. Maybe, I'm still too selfish. Subei smiled to himself. Yes, selfish reasons were at play here. Subei had a crush on Suner, but he didn't have to pay any price for her. After all, there is an essential difference between friendship and love. If Subei could give everything for Suner from the bottom of his heart, then Subei might have accepted Suner's proactive expression. After hanging up the gear, Subei decided to go back first. It would be best to discuss this matter with the monks. After all, the story world of Mr. Zombie has also been participated in by the monk Fatty Gyatso. Maybe everyone can find some possible benefits in the story world that has been completed. In this way, even if he enters that story world, Even if he doesn't meet sooner, he won't leave empty-handed, right? At least, in Sudbai's current impression, there must be many secrets hidden in that demon cave. At that time, he and others just passively wandered around in it and finally found a way out quickly, without any chance to truly I want to explore it, and this time, if I return to that story world, at least, I will not be chased away by that kind of fox monster now. If I meet a monster of the same level as the original fox monster again, beast, it's really hard to say who is chasing whom. There was a traffic light ahead. Sudbai stopped at the intersection and waited for the light to turn green. There was a car parked next to Sudbai. There was a girl sitting in the driving seat. The girl was wearing sunglasses and was petite. She also had a style that belonged to her. She shouldn't be too old, but she wasn't too young either. She doesn't have the youthfulness of a pure girl, but more like a newly married young woman who has experienced the nurturing of marriage and body. The other party just looked around boredly while waiting for the red light, and then saw Sudbai. He looked at Sudbai a few more times with some confusion, and then took out his mobile phone to snap a few pictures of Sudbai. At this time, the light turned green, Sudbai released the brakes, and the car drove off. The girl was slow for a moment, and when the car behind her honked her horn to urge her, she hurriedly put down her phone and drove out. However, she originally turned left, but she followed Sudbai's car straight onto the straight road. Sudbai didn't notice anything about the car following him at first. In the real world, to be honest, there weren't many things that Sudbai needed to worry about and be wary of. Especially at this time, you are still in this big Shanghai. There is no necessary causal relationship between the audience and they will not kill you specially. And even if you encounter a car accident or something, Sudbai will not die. If Sudbai is more neurotic, beware of this and that, only when you are full. But about a quarter of an hour later, the red car was still following him, and Sudbai naturally noticed the clues. For this reason, Sudbai deliberately turned down the intersection in front and entered the service road, and the red car followed him down. Turning on the right light, Sudbai pulled over and stopped the car. The red car drove past Sudbai first, but soon stopped 20 meters ahead. Sudbai sat in the car without getting out of the car. He reached out and touched his chin and lit a cigarette. The girl got out of the car, wearing high-heeled sneakers, holding a mobile phone and a small bag in her hand, and trotted straight towards Sudbai. "Is it Brother Sudbai? Brother Sudbai? Is it you?" The other party directly called out his name, which made Sudbai stunned for a moment, but then, when the girl took off the sunglasses on her face, Sudbai recognized the girl's beautiful facial contour and the woman in Sudbai's memory. After some coincidences, Sudbai finally guessed the girl's identity. "It's me, Auntie, is she okay?" It is indeed an embarrassing thing for someone to remember your name but you forget her name, so Sudbai can only go and greet your aunt first to show that I still know you. "My mom is very nice. Cousin, I thought you looked familiar when I first saw you. Then I took a photo of you with my phone and sent it to my mom. My mom sent me a message back and confirmed it was you, so I followed you all the time. The car came over. By the way, cousin, didn't you agree that you would come to my wedding? Why did you fail to make the appointment in the end?" Sudbai shrugged, "Sorry, I was busy at that time." The girl's eyes glanced at Sudbai's car and clothes, but there was no look of contempt on her face, just a look of pity. Yes, a mercy. The girl still feels a little unbearable when she thinks that her cousin, who used to have a rich family and would send her some expensive bags or perfume every now and then, is now driving such a car on the road. It is said that my cousin's business failed and all his assets were lost. Although my cousin didn't travel much with his relatives in the past, at least during the holidays, he could occasionally hear some topics about him from those relatives, but in recent times, my cousin has basically disappeared from the circle of relatives. Probably after the originally impressive group was wiped out, there was no place for a down-and-out young man to arouse the interest of his relatives. "Cousin, come home and sit with me. My mother misses you so much." The girl put her hands on Sudbai's car window and looked at Sudbai seriously. Tomorrow night Sunar will enter the story world, and Sudbai still needs to go back to discuss these matters with Fatty Monk and the others, so Sudbai was ready to refuse immediately, but suddenly, Sudbai looked at the hanging around his cousin's neck. That piece of jade. The jadeite was carved with the image of a bodhisattva, with some original lines, so it was even more precious. Sudbai didn't notice it before, but now after looking at it, he found a very weak energy fluctuation on the jadeite. Is it a protective weapon? This is not surprising. Low-level or broken magic weapons are often bought by rich people and used as amulets. But then, Sudbai discovered something was wrong. The vitality in his cousin was being instilled into the jade in a very slow but continuous way. This is not a magic weapon. This is an evil weapon. Seemingly noticing that Sudbai was paying attention to the jade around her neck, the girl smiled and said, "This is a gift from your cousin-in-law. My mother and I each have one. He seems to have some at his place. Come home with me, brother, I'll give you one too." Sudbai, who originally wanted to refuse, nodded at this time. "Forget it, let's go see her aunt first. Now that she has encountered such a thing, it would be unreasonable for her to be too lazy to show up for fear of trouble." As for Sunar's matter, while his cousin was driving and leading the way, Sudbai took out his mobile phone and sent a message to Fatty Monk and Gyatso's WeChat group, roughly talking about his plan to use the special reward to return to the story world of Zombie World. Ask them for their opinions and where else would be a good place to pick up missing items. Sudbai remembered that her uncle had passed away several years ago, and her aunt had always been alone. The family was in a mid-range villa area, and it was unobtrusive, which was in line with her aunt's usual way of life. The car stopped on the road outside the door. After the cousin got out of the car, he walked directly to a beautiful woman standing at the door and looked out. He took the beautiful woman's hand and pointed to Sudbai. Sudbai walked over, nodded gently to the beautiful woman, and called, "Auntie. Hey, you brat, I haven't seen you in almost a few years, and your sister still has to catch you on the road." The aunt cordially took Sudbai's hand and entered the house. The decoration of the house was also very low-key, but it highlighted the temperament and style. After arranging Sudbai to sit down on the sofa, the aunt asked her cousin to talk to Sudbai while she went to the kitchen to prepare something. Fruit. Sudbai was about to talk to her cousin about this brother-in-law. Who would have thought that my aunt came out of the kitchen carrying the freshly washed grapes and apples and said directly, "You are a very kind family. You are very isolated from relatives and friends. Your mother came over the day before yesterday. I thought she was going to stay with me for a few days. Who knew she left the next day without even saying hello?" Snapped. The teacup in Sudbai's hand fell off and broke. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 566. Own mother? No. To be exact. That woman came back. For a moment, Sudbai suddenly felt a chill on his back, but what followed was not fear, but a coldness engraved in his heart, and an angry flame burning under the ice. In my mind, I couldn't help but start to see the images of those two photos, and also the image of me being thrown into the hospital bathroom sink and rinsed with tap water when I was a baby. In that glass culture tank, I floated inside, looking at the scrolls of scrolls that kept turning pages, where I spent my beautiful childhood life. Fatty once joked with Sudbai, saying that Sudbai's goals in life are very clear now. The first goal is to kill his mother, the second goal is to kill his father, and the third goal is to kill his real self. But this kind of joke with a teasing meaning, even after the fat man said it, he didn't laugh. It was really too deep and too heavy. Sudbai broke the teacup, and his cousin and aunt were also shocked. The two women started to clean it up. No one blamed Subai for his rough hands and feet. After all, neither the aunt nor the cousin did anything vulgar. Why is there any contempt for Subai because he is now bankrupt? Why, didn't she say that you mother and son are in constant contact? The aunt obviously noticed something unusual about Subai when she heard the news about her mother. Well, we keep in touch frequently, but we haven't seen each other for a long time. Subai explained that he actually showed his mental state in front of ordinary people before. This really shouldn't be done, but Subai didn't pay too much attention to it. On this point, after all, I couldn't calm down at all on this matter. Oh, that's it? My sister has always been like this. She said that since the child has grown up, he should have his own life. As for her, since she has raised the child, she should also have her own life. So the two of us are the best. It's best not to interfere with each other. When the aunt said this, she looked at her daughter. The cousin smiled and said, "Fortunately, my mother is not like my aunt, otherwise I would be miserable. As for me, even if I get married, I still want to live with my mother." After being interrupted by his mother's incident, Subai suddenly thought of the jade on the necks of his aunt and cousin, and immediately said, "Aunt, there seems to be something wrong with the jade on your neck." "Problem? What's the problem?" "Xiao Lu gave this to me. One for each of us, mother and daughter. Take a look. Is there anything wrong with the quality?" The aunt took the initiative to pick the jade from her neck and handed it to her. Subai took the jade. Sure enough, this jade, like the jade on his cousin's neck, has the effect of absorbing human life. The Bodhisattva or Buddha statue in the jade becomes more and more vivid due to the continuous injection of the wearer's life. "Auntie, this jadeite contains special impurities inside. Most people can't see it, but it's actually not very good for the human body. Do you and your cousin have any symptoms of sleeping lightly at night and prone to nightmares?" "It's true." "Is it really the reason for this jade?" the aunt said with some surprise. "Is it really because of the jade?" My cousin suddenly stood up. "What kind of crap did Lu Cheng give to me and my mother? When he comes back from Japan, I will definitely not be done with him." Qian, don't be big or small. Your cousin is still sitting here. Why are you so angry? Didn't your cousin tell you about this jadeite? Ordinary people can't see it. Xiao Lu is probably also someone. I was confused, and when I saw something nice, I bought it as a gift to us, and they didn't mean any harm." The cousin was scolded by her mother, and then she sat down holding her breath. "But, how did my cousin know?" "Oh, I know. My cousin must have seen a lot of good things before." Subai smiled for a while, but could only nod. When the topic came to this point, my aunt said to Subai with a bit of distress, "Xiaobai, as a man, you can start your career all over again. If you need anything, tell me, and I will support your comeback." Subai knew that his aunt was actually from an official family, just like his so-called mother. Therefore, the union of his so-called mother and his so-called father was more like one person from a secular perspective. A political marriage between two large families. "Where is my brother-in-law?" Subai asked. "From what my cousin said, does he work in Japan?" "Yes, we are in Japan." My cousin took out her mobile phone and handed it to Subai. "Look, this is a photo of the two of us." In the photo, the cousin is nestled in the arms of a young man. Behind him is a stretch of mountains and a light blue lake. The young couple can also reflect the peaceful temperament of the years. "Behind this, is high lake, right?" Subai asked. "Yes, we didn't go abroad for our wedding and honeymoon. We lived in Delhi for half a month," said the cousin. Since the so-called brother-in-law is not in the country, Subai has no way to check whether the other party really has any problems. He can only say that he will pay more attention to it in the future, or he can also post a post in the audience forum to let someone know. Low-level listeners go to Japan to investigate this person. Sudbai only needs to pay some story points or magic weapons that he can't use now as a reward. Standing up, did my mother stay here overnight when she came here last time? Or did she leave anything behind? Sudbai looked around, but except for the jade on his aunt and cousin, Sudbai didn't find anything special. How long have you mother and son not seen each other? Okay, my aunt will take you to the room where your mother lived. Qian, try calling your aunt to contact her and tell her about this. This is too shameful. If she is still in Shanghai, tell her to come over immediately and let our family have a good reunion. Qian nodded in agreement and picked up her mother's cell phone to look for her aunt's phone number. Sudbai was led by her aunt to the door of a bedroom. Xiaobai, you can see for yourself. My aunt asked someone to bring some hot pot bottoms from the CD last time. The three of us will make a small hot pot later. After finishing speaking, my aunt patted Sudbai worriedly. Shoulder, I must have dinner at Auntie's place tonight. I haven't seen you in a few years. I always have time for a meal, right? Yes, Sudbai smiled. That's true. After the aunt left, Sudbai walked into the bedroom alone. Thinking that the woman had just slept here one night a while ago, Sudbai seemed to be able to smell the cold and dangerous atmosphere from this bedroom. The room had obviously been renovated and was very cozy. Sudbai sat down on the edge of the bed, facing the dressing table in front of him. The dressing table was in European style, with a white base and frame, giving it a bright and clean look. Feel. After getting up, Sudbai walked to the dressing table. There were some cosmetics on it, but she didn't know whether these cosmetics belonged to her aunt or that woman. Looking at the dressing table, Sudbai imagined that the woman might have been sitting here a few days ago, putting on makeup in front of the dressing table. For a moment, the veins in the clenched fist of Sudbai's right hand were exposed, and an extremely depressed aura was exuding from his body. If this was not my aunt's home, then it is very likely that Sudbai would be unable to control himself and destroy everything around him to vent his anger. At this time, Sudbai's eyes suddenly noticed something. There seemed to be lines on the mirror of the dressing table. The lines were not worn out, but seemed to be scratched out with nails. You must know that although glass is brittle, it is very hard. Sudbai came closer and reached out to touch it. Indeed, it was a trace lightly scratched with the nail of his little finger, which connected the frame of the mirror. Sudbai didn't know what this trace meant, but soon, when Sudbai took a step back, a picture appeared in Moran's mind. This man was sitting in front of the dressing table, holding his head with his left hand and folding his feet. Put them together, sometimes my little finger gently rubs this part of the dressing table. Then, her entire face, that is, the direction her eyes were facing. It's on the wall diagonally above the dressing table. Sudbai also looked over. There is a wedding photo hanging there, which is a photo of my cousin and her cousin-in-law. In the photo, the two people are handsome and handsome. She sat here and looked at the wedding photos for a long time leisurely and contentedly. Sudbai couldn't understand. Was she suddenly bored or did she really have a deeper meaning? After staying in the bedroom for about 20 minutes, outside, my aunt shouted, "Xiaobai, I came out to eat hot pot. Let's see how your aunt's pot is. I haven't seen you for so many years. I really forgot what you like. What kind of hot pot do you want to eat?" "Here we come," Sudbai responded. When he got up and walked to the bedroom door, Sudbai's hands suddenly trembled, and a serious expression appeared on his face. Because he suddenly thought of something very serious. In my own memory, didn't my two cheap parents die in a car accident when I was 7 years old? At that time, my relatives and friends also accepted the statement, and there were even so-called relatives who wanted to adopt Sudbai. He tried to embezzle Sudbai's property, but was finally rejected by Sudbai himself. So, obviously, in his aunt's understanding, his mother should be dead, and she has been dead for almost 20 years. Why can my aunt still calmly say to herself, Her mother came here to see her a few days ago. The two of them chatted and planned to stay for a long time. All of these. What is going on? Suddenly, Subai's mind came back to what her aunt had said when she came out of the kitchen carrying fruit. Your mother has been here. But that woman. Shouldn't he have been pronounced dead long ago? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 567. Chapter 567. Well, the title of the last chapter is about Subai. It expresses Subai's special emotion towards his mother. I hope everyone understands. There is no other meaning. There will be more tonight. Don't panic, hold on tight to the dragon. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 568. My aunt's hot pot is not very rich, but both the bottom of the pot and the small amount of side dishes are very exquisite. Anyway, it is only eaten by 3 people, and 2 of them are women, so naturally there is no need to prepare too much. All in all, the meal was very warm and delicious. Before Subai left, her aunt asked Subai to come and see her often. Subai said that she didn't live in Shanghai often now, and she might not have many opportunities in the future. After leaving her aunt's house, Subai drove the car very slowly. In Subai's mind, he actually knew that his parents were not dead. Before, he just doubted whether his parents were listeners, but now he can basically conclude that his parents died in a car accident when he was 7 years old. Had long been forgotten by Subai, or ignored, because it should have been done by his parents or the broadcaster, and because of this, Subai didn't realize it before. My aunt and the others probably didn't know that their parents were still alive. But now, my aunt and cousin both thought that their mother was still alive. They didn't feel strange at all about their mother's visit and took it for granted. This was worth pondering. There are 2 possibilities. One possibility is that the memories of my aunt and cousin have been altered. For example, my cheap mother felt tired and lonely hiding somewhere, so she wanted to come back and visit, and then altered the memories of her aunt and cousin to make her feel like the feeling of an old friend returning. That woman can definitely do this kind of thing without any psychological pressure. She is an absolutely selfish and cold-blooded woman. She seems to be the only one in her dictionary. There is another possibility, that is, his parents were killed in a car accident when he was 7 years old. It was because they encountered something in the story world, or they made some illusion to deceive the radio and make the radio think they were dead. According to the radio's arrangements for deaf listeners in the real world, their parents died in a car accident. In society and in the family, everyone who has a relationship with their parents will naturally accept this fact without any doubt. But maybe recently, I don't know whether the woman did it intentionally or was passively discovered by the broadcast. The broadcast overturned this conclusion and this perception. So naturally, in the consciousness of relatives and friends, people who had been dead for nearly 20 years naturally lived again. But what does this woman suddenly alive mean? Subai certainly didn't believe that the woman and the man had been hiding in a paradise-like place as a Condor couple. There was no love at all between the man and the woman. But she came back and appeared in Shanghai again. It gave Subai a feeling of thorns in his back. The real self before has already appeared, but in front of the current self, that real self can only be a poor clown-like guy, who dare not appear in front of him except to create trouble for himself behind his back. But this woman. It's different. It is no exaggeration to say that this woman's status is higher than that of Lychee. The original Lychee was also created under her hands, but it is conceivable that Lychee and her relationship is not good, and the two have long been opposed. Sometimes Subai also wonders, did his 2 cheap parents really build the orphanage to do good deeds? 2 listeners, Lizzie and Gongzihe, appeared in the orphanage. There may have been other listeners. It may be that Subai didn't know about it, or he may have died in the story world long ago. But it is absolutely impossible for that couple to adopt an orphan for the sake of adopting an orphan with a kind heart. The more you know about some things, the more cruel you will feel. Many things, hidden under the shell of truth, kindness, and beauty, are bloody and sharp, the kind that can sting a person in pain. Fortunately, at this time, Subai finally realized the importance of having a nest now. As long as he was always in that nest, with the monk and the others around him, and with Jixiang also there, he would at least have some courage to confront that woman. As for whether he can kill her, that's not what Subai wants to think about now. But it will. There will come a day. As he continues to immerse himself in the story world, continues to grow stronger, and continues to grow, sooner or later, he will have the ability to kill her. By then, the broadcaster will probably be happy to see this happen. Maybe broadcasting would also be willing to help him and add fuel to the flames. At that time, he would really be inherited by heaven, as broadcasting decreed. Unknowingly, the car drove to the front of the house and stopped. When Subai opened the iron door, he subconsciously looked around, as if there was a pair of cold eyes in the darkness, staring at him and observing him. Oh. Maybe he was starting to feel wary, Subai thought. After learning that the woman was back, Subai knew that he had indeed become much more sensitive. After entering the door and changing shoes at the entrance, Subai saw Jixiang crawling there, a pair of amber cat eyes staring at him. Subai bent down, stretched out his hand and patted Jixiang on the head. For the first time, Jixiang did not express disgust with Subai's behavior of treating it as a pet cat. He just barked softly, like a human sighing, and then got up and walked back to the bedroom. At this point, the little guy should have fallen asleep, and Jixiang will be by his bedside as usual. But today, Jixiang clearly noticed something unusual. After all, cats are one of the most sensitive animals, and Jixiang is also a big monster. It's just a pity that Jixiang has no intention of talking and refuses to tell Subai some things. It seems to be content with the status quo. It is content to eat, drink, play and sleep with the little guy every day. At this time, looking at Jixiang's figure disappearing around the corner of the bedroom, Subai seemed to sense an aura of twilight in him. In the living room, Fatty was sitting there eating peanuts and watching a variety show. Monk and Gyatso also walked out of their respective bedrooms and came to the living room after hearing the sound of Subai coming back. Subai went to make 4 cups of tea himself and put them on the coffee table. I really didn't know you had this special reward, Fatty said, a little surprised. I went back to the story world I visited for 3 hours. Why didn't such a good thing happen to me? That also depends on chance, the monk said. As your strength gets higher, the broadcaster will deliberately lower your rewards. Don't you see that every time a story world is opened, some story points are randomly given as rewards? These story points are correct. At our level, it is basically useless. This forces us to discover and compete in the story world and the real world. I fed you at first, then the food was reduced, and I watched you fight for it, Gyatso echoed. But Subai, why do you have to go to the story world of Mr. Zombie? In that story world, there are valuable places. One is the Taoist Mountain Gate, and the other is the Demon Cave, but in these 2 places, there are no clear interests that are really worth grabbing. You still need to explore, but you only have 3 hours. First, God knows the broadcast will tell you which location to teleport to, and then you may go to the Taoist Mountain Gate or the Demon Cave, and 3 hours may not be enough. I have my reasons, Subai sighed helplessly. The monk nodded slightly and said, in this case, we can only make plans for you. If the delivery location is close to the Demon Cave, then you can go to the Demon Cave to hunt monsters. Now, even if you encounter it again, the big monster in the monster cave is not without the strength to fight. In addition, you will be automatically teleported back in 3 hours, so you can seize the time and kill 1 or 2 monsters even at a huge cost. Take the precious parts of their bodies, whether they are bones or inner elixirs, and come back, which is also a huge wealth. If it is close to the Taoist mountain gate, then you can climb the mountain as quickly as possible. In fact, although the mountain gate is destroyed, there are dangers in places such as the practice room or the sword-making workshop, but there is a chance of encountering some magic weapons. It's also very big. I don't expect you to pick up the general MOS yet. That's unrealistic, but if you pick up a few flying sword magic weapons, it's still a big gain. There aren't many flying sword magic weapons to begin with. Also uses a mahogany sword. Obviously, this was the result of the discussion between the 3 monks in the afternoon. After Subai sent the matter to the WeChat group, they discussed it for a while, but because the specific details were unknown, they did not know where Subai would be sent to, which location, so it is unrealistic to plan and arrange in more detail. If it spreads to other places. The monk paused and continued, then let's take a look at the scenery. No, actually I remember that there seems to be another place. Fatty suddenly said, I remember that Dabai was captured by a group of Qi refiners from the Qing court and locked up in a dungeon. Subai looked at the fat man in surprise. What do you mean? What I mean is that if you left a certain location in the story world, you may still return to your original position when you go back. We don't know yet whether the story world will be reset by the broadcast, but it is unlikely that it will be reset. First of all, the story world still retains its own complete world system, and nothing was really destroyed by us last time. Secondly, the monk brought out a fox from that story world. The fox was put in a temple by the monk because it had no more demon power. And Dabai, you brought out your son. If the story world is reset, you might bring out another son in this story world. This kind of thing is impossible to happen. So by inferring this, we can basically confirm that the story world is still the same as it was after we left, and will not be reset. As for how long the time flow has passed, according to the usual aesthetics of broadcasting, maybe it won't change. Maybe the NPC inside saw you shrouded in white light and disappeared 1 second and thought he was dazzled because you were back again the next second. So, by Max, if you want to return to this story world, you have to be prepared. Because you should be locked there with various chains as soon as you enter. Like an RBQ.